Struggling to edit noisy wildlife photos? In this video, I'll share the exact workflow I trust to fix noisy photos captured in the toughest low light conditions, like this one captured at ISO 25600. You'll see how to remove noise, recover hidden detail, and produce clean, sharp results. I'll also take you through the full edit. And stick around because this workflow includes a powerful image quality boost most photographers miss. Let's dive in. The first step of my workflow to deal with high ISO noise is to run the image through DxO Pure Raw. Now, the reason why I do that, I just find the detail and the noise reduction to be superior in DxO Pure Raw when compared to the Lightroom denoise. Now, just a quick disclaimer. I paid full price for DxO Pure Raw, and this video is not sponsored. I recommend it because I genuinely believe in it. I did reach out to DxO for an affiliate link, so if you'd like to support the channel, you'll find a link in the description for the free trial or purchase. The first thing I do in DxO Pure Raw 5 is select Deep Prime 3. That is the latest algorithm I use that is included with DxO Pure Raw 5. I then go down to luminance, and because this is a very high ISO image, the luminance value will be quite high. I'm just going to zoom in here so we can see the details at 100%. So the higher we go on luminance, the better the noise reduction will be. Obviously, you are going to lose slight detail in your image when you do remove noise. But if you look on the left-hand side, that is the original raw file. And on the right-hand side of this bar here, you can see the output from DxO Pure Raw. So you can see it's clean up an amazing amount of noise there. I think I might include a little bit more on this luminance. Definitely look inside the out of focus areas to get a good evaluation on the noise. Also, turn off lens sharpness optimization to remove any sharpening. You don't want to increase the sharpening because that kind of enhances some of the noise that is visible. So I generally turn that off just to do my noise reduction step. And I think a value of 70 looks good. Force details, leave that at 0. That does increase detail artificially in the image if you are lacking some detail. I tend to not use this slider that much, so I leave it on 0 for now. And then lens sharpness optimization. This is going to add a small amount of sharpening to the image. So I normally use this at a soft setting here at an intensity of 75. You can go all the way to 200 on the lens sharpness optimization setting there, but I like to leave it at soft just to give the image a slight boost in clarity. And then I leave vignetting off and I use chromatic aberration, and lens distortion I leave off. So click process now, and that then brings the file back into Lightroom with a DNG file. In the intro of the video, I mentioned about an image quality boost that you can apply to image. Now, when you bring a DNG file back into Lightroom, you're able to use super resolution here. And what that's going to do, it's going to double the pixel dimension on each axis. So if you have, in this example, I've got a dimension of 8256 by 5504. If you apply super resolution, the outputted resolution is now 16512 by 11008. Now, what I do is if I use super resolution, I normally click that right at the end of the workflow. I don't need to have that resolution to edit the file. I'd rather edit the file as is, and then the very, very last step of the workflow, if I do want that increase in resolution, I will click that. Now, it's not a flawless tool. It doesn't magically just give you more megapixels. It is enlarging the pixels, but if you need some resolution to apply for printing, it can give you a slight boost in clarity and image quality. So to start this image out, I'm going to use Adobe Standard. I'm going to increase the exposure slightly. It's slightly underexposed. I'm going to increase the blacks just to soften out the image. This was captured after sunset, so I don't want very hard shadows. I want them to be nicely subdued. Then I'm going to bring in some contrast with the white slider here. Just paying attention to those very bright areas on the leopard's leg there. I like to set exposure in the beginning of the workflow and give the image a slight bump in contrast before I use the white balance. If you look at the original file, it might be a bit difficult to adjust white balance if your image is underexposed. So after setting the exposure and contrast, I'll then adjust the white balance slightly. I think the camera got it pretty right. I might go back to adjust that white balance in a bit, but let's move on. The next thing I'm going to do is slightly darken the foreground, and I'm going to use this Lightroom Tools preset pack here that I have, which is available for free in the link in the description if you want to check it out. I'm going to use a foreground linear darken mask here, and what that does is just places the mask on the bottom with the desired effect applied to it. So there are a whole bunch of other effects in this Lightroom Tools preset pack, which I will definitely use in this image. I'm going to look at increasing the attention on the leopard's face slightly. So I want to select subject, and then I'm going to intersect that with a radial gradient. I only really want to look at this sort of section on the face. Just going to increase the exposure slightly on that, just to draw a little bit more attention. And then I might zoom in onto the eyes here and just increase slight exposure just in those very bright parts of the eye there. Let's just turn overlay on so we can see where we're painting. Really only want to just increase the catch lights in those eyes, which in this case was actually the lights from a vehicle. I think maybe the eyes are a bit too bright, so I'm just going to drop the amount of the brush that we had for the eyes there. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I do notice some slight blue color coming into the leopard here. I'm also not a fan of the almost magenta orange look on the road. And I feel like there's too many colors in this image, and I want to minimize the actual color, and I want to really just focus on the leopard. So I'm going to go to color mixer, just going to decrease the saturation of the purple here. You can see there's a lot of purple in the road and magenta as well. So I'm going to decrease that. I then want to look at the background green color. I'm going to select that with the color picker tool there. Just drop some of the saturation slightly. And then increase the saturation on the leopard. Very slightly there. It might be a little bit too much on the desaturation on those colors. I think that's looking a little bit better. It's just bringing a little bit more mood into the image. Now I want to look at creating almost a vignette effect here. I'm going to do that with a radial gradient. I'm going to create a darkening effect on the entire image on the outside, making sure to feather that in. Here's the overlay of the vignette. So you can see it's mainly centered around the face, and I'm darkening all of the area around the leopard, just so I'm forcing more attention to the face there. Turn that overlay off. It's a very subtle effect there, but I think it works quite nicely. One thing I like to try and do is when I have, in this example, a leopard with very dominant color in the image, I like to increase the luminance, just to bring a little bit more brightness to the leopard here. So you can see that color, as I drag that slider up and down, you're just increasing the brightness of that color, which I think in this example works quite well. I might also increase some of the saturation very slightly. I think that's given the subject a little bit more attention. Now that blue I was talking about in the leopard's tail here, I think that's catching some of the ambient light, and I'm not sure if I like it. I'm going to just use this color picker tool and just select there and drag that blue down and up just to see how it's been affected. And I think maybe just dropping the blue very slightly works quite nicely there. Now, talking about removing blue, I'm going to contradict myself and add some more blue here, but it's more of a controlled blue tone using the color grading. And this brings in a lot of mood into the image. Just increasing this very dramatically, just to choose the color that I want. Then I'll roll that back there. And then using the balance, I'm just going to isolate that very dark blue to the very dark shadow areas in the image. Might decrease the luminance slightly. Is introducing a little bit of a color shift to the overall image, and I don't want that. I really only want that in the very darks of the image. So you can see there that definitely adds a little bit of mood. Maybe I'll bring a little bit more in. That's looking quite nice. I'm now blocking up some of the blacks here, so I'm just going to go to the black slider again. Just increase that. Might increase some more of the highlights just to bring some more brightness to those highlighted areas. Drop the exposure slightly for that effect there. One thing I like to do is add some negative dehaze to the entire image. I like my images to be a little bit softer in appearance, and obviously I don't want to go too far with a negative dehaze, but a little negative dehaze does work nicely from time to time. Then I won't add clarity to the entire image. I don't want to add clarity to the background. I only want to add clarity to the subject. So I will go to the masking, click select subject, just have a look and see what that's done. There's some areas where I don't want that to be selected there, mainly on the grass there, and I think just in between the legs there. And what I will do is add clarity to the in focus areas. So I'm just going to add a brush. I'm going to just paint a very broad brush across the plane of focus like that. So you can see everywhere in red is generally the in focus area. I might actually remove some of it from the back of the leopard because it's slightly out of focus. So I don't want to bring too much clarity to those out of focus areas. So I'm just removing those with a brush there. And I'll just give the mask a small bump in clarity like that. There's parts of the leopard that are bugging me. If you look at this front leg, it almost looks very bright from the ambient light, and the ambient light is very cool, but we've got the warm light from the spotlights on the leopard. So this is throwing me off a little bit here, and also on this back leg. So what I'm going to do, select a brush, going to paint on that area, paint on this area here, going to remove some of that background that I missed, that I messed up there. Let's just click Auto Mask. Just going to remove some of that there. Now the Auto Mask is going to prevent me from painting over the subject. Now I'm only really selecting the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the highlights slightly, and I'm going to warm this up to try and match the light on the leopard. I don't want to go too far because I have selected part of this leg. So what I might do is create another brush and just really isolate it to these very bright areas on the side of the leopard here. And then give that another bump in white balance there. Now, to me, I'm not exactly happy with the colors. I like the overall contrast, but the colors to me look a bit strange. Also, the image feels slightly off balance. I'm going to just crop the image slightly. I want that line to be almost the horizontal reference in this image. I'm just going to crop it like so. That feels a little bit better for me. Going to the calibration tab. I like to play around with the colors on this calibration, and I think decreasing the hue on the blue channel works quite nicely. Might increase some of the saturation there. Adjusting these sliders is just a bit of an experiment, just to see how the colors change. But I often find this almost helps me get the colors to look a little bit better. I'm going to go back to that vignette effect we created. I want to darken it a little bit more, feather it a bit more. But what I want to actually try and do is I want to bring in some light from the left-hand side. So I'm going to subtract a radial gradient from this top area here. And then I'm going to create a new radial gradient. Let's just zoom out so I can see this image a bit smaller. Let's go to 6%. I'm going to create a nice big radial gradient here. I'm going to subtract select subject. I don't want to affect the subject at all. And then I'm just going to increase the blacks, just to add a softened, almost appearance of light coming in from the right-hand side. Roughly about there. I might warm it up slightly. Increase the amount. And I might add a little bit of negative dehaze. That just helps sell that little bit of ambient light coming in. If you drag it away, you can see it without it, and then just drag it in slightly. You really want it to be quite subtle and not look extreme. I think for that effect there. Let's zoom back in. That's without the effect on the background. That's with it now. Might be a bit strong, so let's just roll off the amount slightly. I think I want to go next back to the color grading. I think I just want to darken some more of these shadows. Add some more blue in there. And then one effect I really like to use is the black fade, and that's just going to soften the blacks in the image. So I'm using the preset pack there, choosing black fade, choosing an amount of about 30 or so. Now, if you look at the histogram here, there's a lot of highlights almost missing from this one. So I'm just going to increase the whites just to bring in a bit more contrast in the highlight areas. And I might just drop down the exposure like that. I want to add a little bit more mood into this image. So I'm going to drop the vibrance slightly. I don't want the colors to be very strong. I want it to be very subdued. I think that's looking a lot moodier and a lot better. Really want to soften out those shadows, but still bring in a bit of contrast with those whites. Just going back and forth with some of those sliders there. Now, one thing I am noticing in the road, there's a little bit of red that seems a little bit out of place. I'm just going to go to the red saturation slider and just drop the saturation of the red just in those areas there, just to simplify the color palette a bit further. And I think image is looking good. I think it just needs a small bump in contrast. I'm simply just going to use the contrast slider. because I think that will achieve the effect that I'm looking for. What I'll do next is go down to the detail panel. I want to look at the sharpness for this image. Now, because this was shot at ISO 25600, we've lost a lot of detail, but you can bring back a little bit of it using sharpening. So in this example, because the detail has been lost quite a bit, I'm going to go for quite a high radius. The problem is if you go for a very low radius, it's going to sharpen a lot of the noise that is left behind, and I don't really want to do that. Also, make sure detail is set to 0. I'm going to use a radius probably, let's see, probably about 1, I would think, and then masking is definitely needed here. And to mask this at about 60, zoom back in. And then this, if I wanted to, is where I would set super resolution. That is now going to give us that increase in resolution if we want to print the image or if we applied a very heavy crop. So this is the raw file we started out with, and this is the final result. Now you've seen my full workflow. You might be wondering how Lightroom's own denoise stacks up against DxO Pure Raw. I did a full side-by-side comparison, and you can watch that in this video here.